Hi, Frank. Thank you so much for joining us for the 22nd Happiness Happens Month. I was so excited when our mutual publisher, HCI, suggested you as somebody to interview, and you have a new book out this year, so we'll get to that in a minute. But it even has the word "be happy" in it, and we love that. And
right.
We also love love, because love is a type of happiness. But so thank you for being here. So I was listening to your podcast, and I really think you embody one of the types of happiness called content. And when I'm listening to you, you just seem very content. And I was wondering if you could share a story with us about content and about when you feel content and how that influences your happiness.
Yeah, I'd love to. And Pamela, thanks for having me on. This is wonderful. How lovely to talk about happiness and contentment. You know, the things that have made me most content in my life are things that I didn't expect contentment from. And so you have a kind of an unexpected pleasure that gives a kind of a deepening of contentment. And I'll give you one, not so much a story, but an illustration. You know, when I was young, I was in the movie business and running around and striving and doing all sorts of stuff. And I got married very young. Jeannie and I have been together now for 52 years. We have 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren. And there's a lot of contentment and happiness there. But here is some contentment that I never expected and I would have never foreseen. And it has really been a great pleasure in the last few years. And that is that when I was younger and having my own children and raising them and rushing around and doing all sorts of stuff as a writer and a filmmaker, one of the things that I didn't want to do was get old. I don't mean that I feared aging. I don't mean that I disliked older people. I don't mean that I felt a distance to older people. I had good relationships with them. But if you had said to me, hey, if you really want to find happiness and contentment in this life, what you really want to do is get older. How old? Well, try 70. And the unexpected joy that I have found in having the contentment of being able to look back and understand that the things that I used to worry most about really did not happen. And the fact that that part of my story, the joy that I've had in my relationship with Jeannie, the joy of raising my 3 children, the joy of taking care of my 5 grandchildren, that these things now, from the perspective of having been older, give me tremendous contentment because I know how that story ends. You know, all my worries when I was younger was about what might happen. You know, this might go wrong. This could happen. Something could go wrong with your life, whatever it may be, marriage, money matters, and so forth. Hey, you know, Jeannie and I are still here 52 years later. We've had our big ups and downs, but the fact of the matter is it's such a joy to find contentment in looking back and realizing that from the perspective of an older person, you have more peace and more contentment because you know how your story worked out. You know, you don't have that big future worry. I know that sounds a little odd, but I find tremendous contentment in getting old and older and realizing that the joy that I found in things that has lasted did not go away with getting older. So the idea that somehow the best part of my life was youth oriented really was wrong. It was a mistake I guess a lot of young people make. The quality of the love I experience with my wife is deeper now than ever. The quality of my relationship with the people I love, my children and grandchildren, is deeper. And one reason is because all that striving stuff that distracted me so much, you know, I was not as content when I was striving as hard as I was striving during a more career-oriented phase of my life. So I'll give you one example of the contentment of being a little older. You know, my granddaughter, Nora, happens to be sick at home today. And she's better enough. She's 8 now.
8,
and
okay.
she's better enough. She's my youngest granddaughter. She was better enough today to come down and play in the yard. And recently I built her a tree house. So we were playing hide and seek in the yard. I'm playing outside, so I wouldn't catch whatever she's got. She has a bit of a cough, not COVID, something else. The contentment that I had at that moment if I can just put it this way, far outweighs the moments when I've had a good review of a novel I've written, gotten on some TV show that made some book happen. You know, I barely remember that stuff, but I live for the simpler moments now. And because I'm older, I'm perhaps a little wiser to know that the real joy I find in those moments is both irreplaceable and lasts. Everything else comes to an end. But to get to 70 and know that the power of love in your life has made you more content than you ever were as a younger person, that there's more joy and love right now in my life than at any other moment. If I only had one wish, it would be to freeze this moment, to make my whole life having been like this and to be able to have more of this time. So instead of wishing to get younger or trying to make everything last, to find contentment in the moment you're in as a fact of older age really surprises me. I did not know that this would be the happiest and most content part of my life. So I guess that's not a story, it's just a point.
Well, I think you shared some stories, and it just makes my heart happy to hear that, because I think so many people think aging is not going to be happy. I actually had a therapist one time, and I was in my probably early 30s, but he said to me, he's like, well, when was the happiest time of your life? And I remember looking at him and I'm like, well, I'm thinking it's got to be now, because I'm not in my future and I'm not in my past. I mean, those times were happy, but I don't want to ever think I've had my happiest.
Right. Exactly.
Like, can it be a little bit more just, consistent and different and different, because your happiness changes. But
yeah, and I think the contentment of being older is you've seen things before, you've seen things happen, and the sky did not fall. You got through it. You have a lot more confidence in your future in some way, because you've been there, done that on so many fronts, relationships and work and other things. And so if someone had told me when I was 25, look, you'll be the most content when you're 70, and you'll really look back and feel that a lot of your worries were really silly and misplaced. And indeed, a lot of the things you thought you needed for happiness were not going to make you happy. The things that made you happiest are the very things that you sort of took for granted, the people around you, the relationships, and so forth and so on. I guess getting older, you realize what lasts, and what lasts is relationships with people. And the stuff that doesn't go away is where you have built those. And what goes away is all the stuff you thought was most important when you were 25, 30 years old. And that's a revelation to me that you can't get to until you get to it.
Well, it's true. You don't know until you don't know what you don't know until you get to
Exactly.
live it. So I have a question. So when our world experienced the bit, and this kind of, I think, leads into your book, which is if so you can tell us a little bit about your book.
Sure.
But so in the world, and you use the word confidence, which is one of our 31 types of happiness.
Right.
So when the world spun into COVID, most of us have not experienced that. Like all of us, I think most people, unless you're just a complete trust fund baby type person, you have ups and downs with money, or you have ups and downs. Even in your best of best relationships, you have your ups and downs where you may look at your spouse and go, I don't think I know you anymore. Like you're thinking, what? And, that passes or whatever, you grow together and work through it. So some of that's just normal. And if you have kids, teenagers, it doesn't matter how great they are. They're going to have their hormonal teenage moments. And you're like, okay, they're being a teenager. Yay. That's just part of life, and career chaos is part of life. But COVID was unique for us because unless you went through the Spanish flu in the night early, which some people did, some people caught that and COVID. I read those reports, but how did you feel about that? Like, because you're more content and confident, did you approach it a little bit different? From like, well, I know we'll get through it, or?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the book, and essentially this book came out of an experience that led up into our COVID times, in that Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy is a book that came out of doing 6 years of intensive childcare for my youngest 5 grandchildren. So Lucy, Jack, and Nora. Lucy's now 13. By the way, coming to our house tonight for a sleepover with a friend who's going to be her guest here. Jack is 11 and Nora just turned 8. Well, you mentioned COVID. When COVID started, they weren't in school, they were out. They basically spent a year sheltering between my house and my daughter-in-law and son's house. And they both left work. She's an educator, and he started working from home. So we were their child caregivers 24/7. And really our home became Camp Schaeffer, my last name. So what did we do? My grandson and I and my granddaughters, we rebuilt the barn that I have. We did art projects. I gave each of them cooking lessons every day. And my granddaughter, Lucy, even kept a notebook. We made one project after another. We have a river nearby. You know, we weren't swimming in swimming pools because the whole COVID thing. So we would go swimming in the river. And it is something we hadn't done before because, you know, you went to the beach or to pools. No, okay, the river is where we're going to go now. We had a fantastic year. I had a close friend die of COVID. The impact of the illnesses, you know, weighed very heavy on us. But in terms of contentment, the fact of the matter is, because I'm fortunate enough that I have 3 of my 5 grandchildren literally live across the street. I mean, actually across the street. They would walk over every day, and that's what we did. Now, the book, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, comes out of the 6 years that when I started to take care of these kids along with my wife, Jeannie, so their parents could both work. We were their daycare. We were their nursery school. We were their caregivers. And when I say we, I don't mean Jeannie did this and I helped up. I'm talking about being involved hands-on. I turned down a lot of speaking invitations, which is part of my bread and butter as a writer. I've got maybe 15 books out, and I do a lot of college speaking and so on. I had already reorganized my life to be with these grandchildren more, precisely because of the happiness quotient you talk about. You know, again, getting older and saying, look, I won't get these years back again. I'll do other speaking. I may write other books, but these kids, hey, having been the parent who spent 6 months on the road for part of my children's lives, sometimes when I was so busy, you know, I don't look back with any joy on all the time I missed with them, but all the time I was with them, I do remember well, I wasn't going to get another bite at this apple and make the same mistake. And so we organized everything, and the book, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, came out of that experience. And then I started to study, why am I so happy doing this in comparison with some of the sexier, more, quote, successful career stuff I've done? And actually, there's a lot of science to bear that out. You know, modern evolutionary biology now teaches one thing that it didn't used to. It used to be all about the survival of the fittest. Now they look at the whole evolutionary path and why we survived. It's about the survival of the friendliest. It's all about cooperation. It's all about community. It's all about helping others. And that's where you find joy. So of course, I'm happier taking care of my grandchildren than I am saying, hey, I've just written another book, whatever it might be. I'm not denigrating career and striving, because we all need to do it. But I'm saying, if you're looking for stuff that lasts, at least in my experience, it's in the area of relationships. So I'll just sum up this point this way. If you want to know what the point of my book is, it's to redefine success, not by the size of your paycheck, not by your job title, but by, and I mean this sincerely, by what you see reflected in the eyes of those you love when they look back at you. And if it's peace and happiness and tenderness and joy and contentment and trust, then you are doing something right, and you are going to be much happier. You know, so to me, that's the true mirror. It's the people around you that you love. And so to have these little kids living across the street and watch them grow up has literally given me the happiest moments of my life that I can remember, because I had the sense at this age to reorganize myself to really enjoy it, because you know how quick it goes by. So, you know, that's what the book is about. It's about this childcare leading to happiness, but it's also about the fact that the science, not sentiment, you know, not just good wishes, but the actual science now bears out, the neurobiology and everything else bears out, that when we establish close bonded relationships with those we love and care for, it actually changes the way our brain feels, the way we feel. It changes our emotions more than anything else. And so, you know, it's not rocket science. It's very obvious. But the interesting thing is the book goes between these stories of childcare and parenting and grandparenting, and then the science that backs up why this is giving me such feelings of contentment, joy, peace, love, etc. You know, and I'm certainly not unique in that. This is no discovery. It's simply me looking back down the path and saying to people maybe coming along that path, hey, listen, you know, here's some things I learned, and perhaps you can benefit by reading about this now and balancing your life and work and in a better way than I did, say, with my own children, in contrast to the way I've been able to interact with my grandchildren. So it's not all about, hey, I did everything right, copy me. It's the exact opposite. Here's the mistakes I made. Here's what I learned from them. Here's what I did with the second bite at this childcare apple with my grandchildren. And I just want to say one last thing. If people who don't have children fall in love, have children, stay put, save the planet, hey, I'm talking about falling in love with love itself, whether you fall in love romantically. I'm talking about have children. Right now, Pamela, you're in the place of my caregiver because you are giving me an opportunity to talk about my book, which is what you would do for a child, saying, hey, you did a picture, I'll stick it up on the refrigerator so everybody can see it. This is caregiving. You're parenting right now. Right now, I'm in the place of your child here. So having children and falling in love and these things are open to anybody who has the ability to care about other people around them and put an emphasis into that caregiving. And that's where I think the real joy, peace, love, happiness, contentment can be found. And so it's nothing to do with just biological parenting. It's an attitude toward the world around you.
Yeah, caregiving is definitely that. And sometimes when people often will end an interview with me with, if you had one piece of advice, and I always go into the relationship, and it kind of goes to that, back to the Harvard study that's been going on 70 or 80 years now, that really does show that our relationships really do impact our long-term happiness. And I always remind them, like, even if you're an introvert, you still need 4 or 5 really tight relationships.
Yes.
You know, it's like you said, it's that what somebody's looking back at you with. So as we go to our final question, I always like to ask this: we live in this world where there's just a lot of groupthink with social media. And sometimes it's warranted, like when I went to see the opening weekend of Top Gun, and I got to have all the nostalgia of the first one. But it was actually it was a better movie than I was expecting. And so I'm like putting that on my thing and my social media. And I haven't had anybody that went that said, or I haven't read anybody that went that said, oh, I was really disappointed in that. So sometimes groupthink is fun, or read this book, you know, that's a great groupthink thing. But we all have our own happiness is personal. So I'm sure there's something that makes you personally happy that may or may not make your wife or your kids or your grandkids or your friends happy. And I'm just asking everybody to kind of share what that is. I want people asking themselves, what is my personal is happy? Because I want you to then ask that next question, you know, are you including that in your day or your week, depending on what, or month, depending on what it is?
Yeah, I mean, we've dealt with the big strokes, the relationships with my children and grandchildren, the relationship with my wife, all these things. Okay, but I think you're asking for something very specific and personal. You know, one of the things that really makes me happy is to be able to turn my brain off in terms of thinking about the problems of the world, or even my next book or creative things. You know, I paint, I'm an artist, but even there, I'm using a certain intellectual quality of my brain to compose and to paint and to choose colors. I happen to like really hard manual labor. I build. And what I love about it is that when you're just cutting, measuring, building, planning, mixing up thousands of pounds of concrete to pour a foundation by hand in a wheelbarrow, cutting the rebar with your Sawzall, you know, metal cutter blade, climbing ladders, getting up and down, feeling your body, getting physically tired. The beautiful thing is that my mind works on a completely different level. Everything, all the cares of this life, if you want to put it this way, are replaced by just the intensity of the physical labor, and it becomes a rhythm. So I live in a house, Jeannie and me have been in the same house now for 42 years, and it's an 1835 brick house. I build both carpentry and masonry. I've done all the maintenance myself, rebuilt things, added a wing here, redone the barn with my grandchildren. And I find tremendous individual happiness in just getting lost in that moment of just that hard work, where my mind is on a totally different level of just construction, putting things together. I get a lot of joy and happiness out of the finished project, but what I really enjoy most is getting lost in the doing of it. And I don't think that's unique. I think a lot of people have something in their life like that. And I have one other thing that's like that, although it doesn't take as long as my big summertime rebuilding projects, and that's cooking. I love to cook. And I find the same reason of loving that, you know, you're making something for somebody, and that's great. Same with the building project. It's very satisfying. But the real satisfaction is that you lose yourself, if you have something that you can lose yourself totally in, that is outside of the kind of brain work or worries you usually do. And I find the same thing with cooking. Not always, but sometimes you just get lost in the moment and it's all about the making and doing. And you look up and it's, oh, wow, the world's still out there. I was completely involved here in this cooking project or this building project. So building and cooking are the things I just get lost in and find tremendous happiness and contentment in.
Oh, that is great, because it's true. Sometimes we have to give our mind a break, because if we don't, that's not really healthy in addition to other things. But I love that you shared those two projects, because like the building, sometimes people don't always think of the happiness in that, but there's usually there's usually happiness in hard labor, whether we sometimes recognize it when it's actually happening, or at least my dad taught me that, who grew up on a farm. You know, that was kind of the, like, a good day's hard work is good for you. And you're like, really, as you're mowing the grass or whatever, you're as a kid, you know, like, really.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for participating with Happiness Happens Month with us this year. And I'm just honored you joined us. And so I really so appreciate you. And so again, thank you. And hopefully we'll talk again.
Yeah, please, Pam, let me know how all this goes. Thanks for having me on.